Great. All right. So first and foremost, everybody, hello. Welcome to the launch session for Design with Life, a wonderful new book that just came out. And it's an incredible compilation of projects by a wonderful group of architects and theoreticians called TerreformONE, which basically stands for Open Network Ecology. My name is Paul Miller, aka DJ Spooky, and I am generally a musician, but I'm a musician, an artist, and writer who's deeply interested in technology's intersection with ecology and, of course, innovation. And I generally like to consider myself a futurist, so to speak. So, to join us for the launch of the book Design with Life, we're going to have a great group of people. First and foremost, Mitchell Joachim, who's one of the principal figures in the book. Mitchell Wave Hey. Mitchell is a architect who teaches at NYU and has won many accolades all throughout sort of the technology sphere and the architectural sphere. His partner at TerreformONE is Maria Aiolova, and she's also a very, very well-regarded architect. Their collaborations have been extensive over the years. They're both educators, architects, and conceptualists. And then one of their other colleagues from NYU is Peder Anker, who is a professor at NYU, who has been doing a lot of really interesting stuff from the Bauhaus to ecology and sort of conceptual thinking around innovation, design, and the history of architecture. And we're also being joined by a world-renowned author, one of my favorite kind of critiques, who's written one of my favorite critiques of the legacy and impact of both colonialism, the expansion of Europeans into the quote-unquote New World. And here I am in Manhattan, which was formerly the tribe of the Lenape people. And so he's someone who's really done an incredible group of essays and analysis of the kind of toxic relationship between colonialism, imperialism, and above all, ecosystems. So, Charles C. Mann, thank you for joining us. All right. So, by way of preface, you've just got an introduction from everyone. And I just want to make sure that the audience views this as kind of unfolding and unpacking a wonderful book that has many, many projects and many different facets. Architecture, to me at least, is really in a crisis mode because as we move further into the post-COVID narrative, we're all going to have to be thinking of what is the next normal. Your average building is filled with all sorts of pitfalls. If we think about the circulation of air conditioning, for example, if we think about all the legacy of the 20th century's materials and issues and how air circulates and inefficient building code, bio kind of mimicry and biological systems offer some incredible exit paths from the legacy, the toxic legacy of the industrialized 20th century. So this book explores many of those issues. And so by way of transition, I want to just pass the mic to Mitch and Maria and Peder to kind of riff on their new book, which I got it by Amazon or next day service. Jeff Bezos made, I think, $11 billion in the last month. And this was a couple pennies there and a couple, $20, $30 in his pocket. Or so with that said and done, thank you to Microsoft as well. And this event is part of the Microsoft Sustainability Series. So Mitch, Maria, Peder, Charles, thank you guys so much. It's an amazing new book. You guys want to walk us through it a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's a fantastic introduction, and certainly thank you to Microsoft Garage, especially Mike Pell. It's exciting that they were certainly deeply involved in this whole process and getting this book talk underway. So for all those at Microsoft that are out there, hi. I actually do use some of your software. Not all of it, but still like it for most of the things I type. And certainly the whole board at Terraform, which Paul is a member of our board, which is a group of really hardworking, immensely smart people that sort of advise us on the way of thinking about how Terraform could best operate and fit to our mission. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit group, and we are hell-bent on working to stop extinction on this planet. And that has to deal with all types of creatures: fish, coral, mammals, insects, everything that's disappearing every 7 minutes. So this book, Design with Life, which is on Actar, who is our publisher. Actar does probably the best books you can find on design and architecture. They've been super great to us putting this together. Represents the work of 14 years of folks. Over 400 researchers have been in here. There's dozens of projects in this book that's just fantastic to check out. And I wish we were all here physically. You'd be able to actually see them there, but it's certainly a pretty thick volume, and it represents a major chapter that Maria and I, as kind of the core editors and co-founders, were putting together along with the board of all these different projects and works. And we will be talking about it today. Certainly the essays between Peder and Charles, they were contributors, and there's many other contributors in this book that discuss ideas about design with life, biotech architecture to resilient cities. We have all kinds of polemics or arguments about the meaning of sustainability or what it means to be regenerative or resilient, et cetera. And we'll get into that later. But I guess Maria and I now want to show you just a sort of a preview, super quick preview of some of the projects that we've been up to, including some new work with our current team that's more or less just came out and we haven't shared with anybody. In part because the pandemic has slowed down our construction and manufacturing process of this new project, and the team has been working on it for a really long time, and everyone is really excited to sort of make a presentation. So we thought we would also premiere that new work here today. So let me take a look at some of these slides. Oh, and then of course, just a plug with Peder. Peder and I and another colleague, Louise at NYU, we also wrote this book together, which was a lot of fun. Sort of, it was also a ton of work. Anyway, so on that's global design, which is another kind of topic where we work on together. So at NYU, we do Global Design NYU, which looks at design throughout all of NYU. So now I'm going to take a look at some of our projects real quick. If you give me 1 second, and here we go. Great. So this is Hurricane Sandy, which was one of the largest events we thought of at the time that affected the city of New York. We work at a very large scale and also at a very small scale, thinking about all aspects of the city. We certainly never thought a pandemic like this would happen, but now that we're in this crisis, what are we going to do as architects, designers, planners, developers, historians, writers, the creative class, the political class, your average citizen? It's time that we get to some level of action. So one of the projects that we've been working on is actually dealing with waste in cities. So this is our new client. It is a mealworm, specifically a yellow mealworm. We're also looking at the Amazonian mealworm. And one of the fantastic things about these mealworms is that there's a study and a number of studies that's come out between the United States, Europe, and China, is that they devour styrofoam waste, which is pretty intense. They eat it naturally and they process it by essentially, they moves through their body system. Various enzyme reactions happen in their guts, and then it's produced as a frass at the end from their bowels, and they re-eat their frass, and eventually you get compostable waste that's completely clean from all sorts of chemicals. And we've been fascinated by these creatures and what they can do as far as styrofoam waste, especially e-waste in cities. So we developed a device to deal with e-waste in our cities. We did this with a grant from Bloomberg, and we're one of the winners of the Camden New View competition. So this is a project that's going into the city of Camden, New Jersey. And what it is it's a digester of mealworms that actually take styrofoam e-waste, stuff from your microwaves, your stereos, your computer boxes, refrigerators, all of that styrofoam that's really hard to recycle, that lasts thousands of years, certainly in a landfill. And here, over the course of just a matter of weeks, thousands upon thousands of worms eat and process this styrofoam waste and turn it into compost, which feeds our gardens. And then the worms turn into beetles, and they're eaten by birds. So it's a whole kind of life cycle approach between the worm itself, the styrofoam that we see as an important product, an industrial product, and we have to switch over to something like mycelium, but it's not going away anytime soon. And then locating it in a place that's actually seeing a lot of waste, these empty lots in Camden, New Jersey. So here's our first digester project. On the top of it is what we call a decomposition clock, which looks at the time it takes for things to eventually rot and return to the earth. Anything from aluminum to different types of plastics to styrofoam itself. And then it's a processing system where the community drops in its e-waste into this massive digester. It's eaten by the worms and they turn to its compost. Here's the back of the system. You can see these are little perches for the birds and homes for the birds to eat those worms and beetles when they want to. And this guy up there is throwing in some styrofoam waste. So you climb up like an Aztec temple, you chuck your waste into the digester and it goes away naturally. So what else do we do at Terreform? So one of the things we do is we fight against this problem, which is wildlife population has almost disappeared. We've lost 50% of everything. Birds, insects, corals, like I said before, since the 1970s. That's got to stop. The last creature of its kind is called an endling. So here's the white rhino. We're not going to see them anymore. There's only 2 left on this planet. This is unacceptable. We need to do more. We need to do much more to fight to keep biodiversity alive in our cities and in our countries. What do we do now when it comes to biodiversity? Not much. We have systems that are out there like Active House and Energy Star and LEED and WELL certification, and they're pretty good when it comes to making buildings and infrastructure and towns green, but less than 5% of the points you can get for doing green go towards biodiversity, and that's not enough. We have to increase it probably 100+%. Too much is disappearing too fast, and we will never get some of these things back on this planet again. So Terreform's mission is to design against extinction. That is our primary goal. So how do we do that? We look at waste, which we just saw, food, water, energy, air quality, and do everything we can as a think tank and through the research of our fellowship group to make sure that we make a unique contribution and change or create a paradigm shift in certain sectors, such as food. So here's another client of ours. This is not a mealworm, it's a cricket. We worked with them for many years, and we decided that they would be, well, we didn't decide, the United Nations had decided in 2013 that we need to start eating insects in Europe and America as an alternate form of protein. We can't eat all those cows, pigs, chicken, and lamb anymore. We need to think of getting our amino acid structures and really healthy proteins from plants and from insect-based powders. So if you compare a cricket to a cow, you save 2,000 gallons of water for the same gram of protein you get from cricket powder versus cows. You also save 300 times the amount of greenhouse gas emissions when you don't eat cattle. So here's a comparison between the two that Terreform had done, which is looking at 100 acres of urban land and 100 acres of rural land. One for cattle, the other, those pink areas, are for cricket farms. And you can just integrate cricket farms into cities, produce a super hygienic and really clean protein. We use a technology called architecture, which is essentially gravity, light, air, circulation, etc. And we create a farm system that is probably the best possible environment for crickets. They live a happy life for 6 weeks. They die naturally, and then they're harvested from this system where they're milled into a flour. During that time, we feed them lime rinds and orange peels and apple cores. They're super happy and fat. They run around. They have lots of sex. They enjoy their life as much as we can tell. They do a lot of stratolation, which is essentially chirping, meaning that they're happy, they're beyond survival. They move in these gateway system that we had developed and patented, so they can move throughout the shelter, but as they get bigger, they end up in a space at the end, this large sort of sack where they live out the last week of their life, eating happily, and then eventually die of, cricket happiness. So this is a system that's also expandable. It's meant to be inside urban environments. So you go from pasture to plate super quick in something like this. It's naturally ventilated. So the whole system is as green as possible. We even use, for heating, a variant of Christmas lights. Those horns on the top, actually there's an instrument on the attached to the wind cowls where air moves through these sort of vibrating columns of high pressure air to cool the colony. They come out the top and they magnify the sound of crickets chirping. Crickets chirping are mostly males looking for females. That's when we know they're happy. We also produce these things, which are cricket sex pods. essentially the best use of a Voronoi geometry that I can ever think of in architecture. The males and the females meet. The females say something, I don't know, they have come hither cricket eyes. They reproduce with their mates in these cricket sex pods, and they spread their genetics throughout the shelter. And then after 6 weeks, when they die, they're harvested and used for making bonbons, pasta, bagels out of cricket powder. That's actually an amazing source of protein. This other project, and I'm only going to show a couple, is called the Farm Pod, or the plug-in ecology. It's made by a rotegrity sphere that's flat packed and robotically milled. So it comes easy to assemble. It could be almost any size, from a 4-foot sphere to a 15-foot sphere. The idea here is it's part farm, part furniture, part, I guess, cabin. It belongs inside urban parks or on a urban balcony or rooftop or inside your apartment. And the concept here is that when you eat something, you want to be accountable for where the food comes from. So we allow the production of high yield crops to be made inside this double skin facade system, double skin pot system that has 9 columns of irrigation. You produce food that you would want to have fresh and locally, such as wheatgrass or arugula or spirulina. That's really great for you, that you can add to your salad. So you don't want to do something like corn or wheat, which you have Iowa that can do that really well. But you have your farm pod to produce this food, and you grow it inside your apartment or on a rooftop. You can grow food not only on the outside, but on the inside. So it's a green sphere, not just a green wall, which is usually helpful, but it's 3 times the amount of surface area. Here's the interior where you can see the different sacks and the sub-irrigation systems. The whole thing spins to get maximum amount of solar income so that the food that you produce is super healthy. We also do a lot of cellular agronomy. We make food not from saplings or seeds, but from cells, which is another option. And then the last project I want to talk about is really about design against extinction, which is looking at a species native to New York City. That's the monarch butterfly. We've lost 90 million of these beautiful, charismatic creatures in the last few years. The United States Fish and Wildlife Services are putting them on a red list. They vacillate between endangered and almost extinct. And it's a difficult way to count them, but we've eradicated their habitat from New York all the way to Mexico. And they actually moved from New York to Mexico over generations, to where they reproduce down in Mexico and then come back up. So I think about 4 generations it takes for them to do that. So we wanted to create way stations or temporary sanctuaries for these creatures to give them a chance to rebuild their populations, because we're destroying their habitat all over the coast of the United States. So here, integrated into the facade of these buildings, is a kind of a biotope, what we call a biotope mosaic. It cares for the chrysalis stage, the caterpillar stage, the egg stage, the adult butterfly stage. They can move in and out through these porous facade mechanisms. We also worked on a patent for something like this. So not only can it do butterflies, but it's a modular system that can be added to any development project out there, whether you want to save a rare lizard or some small mammal or a different type of insect. We're looking at ways of preserving these creatures and stopping them from going extinct. They fit into the skin of the building, as you can see here in the front. They move through the atrium spaces that are chuck filled with milkweed that's produced off-site and delivered. There is a pollinator garden on the rooftop, which also increases biodiversity for all other types of creatures, an education center, etc. And you can see on the outside, another group that we worked with was Intel. We have these projection screens that use these USB microscopes that produce large-scale drama of what the butterflies are doing inside the space. So the community from across the street, anyone walking in that neighborhood, can see what's happening with those butterflies. They can say, what's the purpose of that building? And they'll find out that actually we're killing off the monarchs and we've got to stop it. So this is one of the first projects that we had produced in Lolita. We're now working with ODA architects to produce a version in Los Angeles. And we're also doing another project that we're, I believe, on some non-disclosure, but it's in Basel in Switzerland. That's absolutely amazing, with an incredible group over there. Some of the shots of the interior. We worked on a drone that's essentially an artificial butterfly that takes measurements of the living butterflies. So this thing looks at carbon output, population count, it looks at the amount of feed, etc. And these artificial drones, which are essentially micro quadrotors, they are in service or stewards of the living butterflies. We also work for the American Museum of Natural History. We have produced their feeders and many other projects for them. For now, we can just show a few of these images about what we're doing with the American Museum of Natural History. They're just an amazing group that really cares about biodiversity and educating the community and certainly our country about how important insects are in our world. We work with butterflies, and everything we do actually incorporates a live organism, whether it's E. coli or mycelium, or in this case, more butterflies. We work with them at scale. We think of building them into concrete systems so it'll last 100 years and it's fireproof, has a low embodied energy, it's super green. So here we're printing out sections for the butterflies. We're designing concrete walls that are, that we did this with these amazing group of people at BASF, who was also a sponsor of the project. We used plyboo or bamboo as scaffolding. We used a zero petrochemical mold system to make this concrete. The concrete's also impregnated with fly ash, so we're really sequestering a lot of carbon out of the environment. It's a product called Green Sense that BASF has been working on. It gets fitted into the wall, so there's areas for butterfly perch points, there's areas for nectar feeding, there's areas for mud baths in the concrete, because butterflies like taking mud baths. I guess so do I, once a year. It's kind of fun. And then areas for these aperture points for the people inside the building to have a connection to that sliver, that interstitial space, have a connection to the butterflies that are living in this garden just outside their window. So you can look outside your window here, you see the monarchs, you see areas for them where they can drink, eat, rest, areas for air quality. We produced this project, which is a full-scale working section of this facade. It's around 4,000 pounds. That was in the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian. It's now in the Smithsonian in Morristown, New Jersey. This is showing where the butterflies can live inside these walls, and you can actually build biodiversity inside your buildings. We use these different bioplastics for artificial feeders and other things that the butterflies need. A simple gardener working half-time is all you need to take care of an 8-story building. So the maintenance on this is fairly low. And these are some other shots of the butterflies. This is them in situ inside the garden, moving inside that space and enjoying this kind of sanctuary away from all the other dangers that are out there that are killing this very precious and charismatic insect. I mean, this has just got to stop. So this is a zoom in on one of the what we call the coral areas, or this brain areas that are essentially for air quality in this space. And now I want to take it over to my co-founder, Maria Aiolova, who's going to talk about where we do our research and this a phenomenal facility at the new lab that we do it in and how we work as a team. And Maria, it's all you.
Thanks, Mitch. Our mission since the beginning has been to reinvent and negotiate the complex mix that encompasses the city. In order to do that, we started a radical new occupation to reimagine, pioneer, and sustain the future of urban Rome. We call these new professionals urbaneers, and they possess a versatile mixtures of skills and talents. And they range not just from architects and designers and planners, but also firemen and teachers and chefs and health workers should participate in designing the future of urban Rome. Next. So at the Navy Yard, we started a new type of practice that comes in the intersection of design, science, technology, engineering, and sociology. So our studio is located at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, 300 acres of industrial space. Next. And Terreform is now part of New Lab. What started as a group of collaborators, friends of ours from Harvard and MIT, moved to this old shipbuilding factory. Next slide. That we partner with the co-founders to renovate and turn it into this makers village, where we invited many different startups, all working within urban tech, to collaborate together. Next. because today innovation doesn't happen in isolation. You need these charged places where ideas flow freely, where you can bump into each other and have a spontaneous interaction, but also you can have access to all these fab labs and all these technologies and share knowledge and ideas. Next. So today, New Lab is home of over 100 startups and 1,000 individuals working there every day to create new solutions for the urban realm. And again, this is our studio next. And this book contains a chock full of ideas from small to large, from new materials to plans for future cities. And again, all these urbaneers contributed to the book. They're our students and research fellows and all collaborators from around the world. So I know we live in a big crisis, and the optimist in me says, well, this is a new opportunity to rethink how we eat, how we move, how we keep the lights on, how we sequester carbon, and how we create new institutions to solve these problems. And with that, I would like to invite Peder and Charles, who goes by Cam, to talk briefly about their impression of TerreformONE. They've known us almost since the beginning, and they're also contributors to the book. And we'll start with Peder.
Oh, wow, wow. Congratulations, Maria and Mitch. You know, these projects are, you know, so amazing and so cool. And also congratulations to everyone at TerreformONE. I say that because this laboratory, if you like, is not driven by the architects, that is Maria and Mitch, but a whole team of people, a whole group of people. Each time I visit there is always someone else coming in, coming out. And very kind of inventive people, usually young students, obviously on Harvard, MIT, Architects Association in London, often working voluntarily for free or just to be part of the group or for a low salary. It has this sort of very innovative atmosphere of people chatting and finding solutions. It's really exciting to join, and often there's also like some sort of famous guy walking by or whatever. I guess I could remind me of the firm back in the 90s. What was it called? General Magic, sort of inventive research space. So the book is documenting what's happening in there. And what's happening in TerreformONE is, in one level, it's fairly banal, if you like. All the architects are, who are inventive, they're working on environmental issues, right? So saving, the species, and energy efficiency, solar cells, green roofs, and so on. If you don't do that as an architect, that basically means that you are the old gang. You're not the new ones. And Terraform are doing at the very vanguard of that new movement of architects and designers. So if you look a little bit back in history, historians like to do that and compare what they are doing, say Frank Gehry. Some of you maybe are familiar with the Disney Concert Hall in LA or the Bilbao, or say Zaha Hadid. They were really amazing architects and designers, but they were really only concerned about form and beauty. And their buildings are basically sculptures with architects inside, but it's basically artistic sculptures. And they were celebrated, but now that's kind of gone. That whole way of thinking about architecture as only form and beauty is gone. And what TerreformONE is doing is the opposite. They're thinking, let's really think hard about trying to be good to the world and doing it through architecture, and good to the world in terms of not only human beings, but also other species. And that's kind of fascinating, isn't it? Architects have all been obsessed with building for human beings. It's called anthropocentrism, a fancy word for human-centered buildings. Not here. Here we have heard, talking about mealworms and biodiversity and crickets and butterflies and so on as part of thinking about architecture. How can we make our cities, our places beautiful and amazing for these creatures? Mitch and Marie have done this so many times. They kind of say, of course that's what we do. But when you think about it, it's actually super radical and super innovative, and there are not many other designers who think along this path. So they're kind of leading the cutting edge in that direction. And for me, that's really exciting. The radicalism going on. Just think about it. When you're done with listening to this. I just heard someone here making architecture for making crickets happy. Yeah, wow. That's something else. That's really something else. I can't think of anyone else who's done anything like that. So or for monarch butterflies are endangered. So it's not a question of only dealing with rats or pigeons or other animals in the city. I'm immediately like welcoming other new species into the city in a way which we can sort of celebrate biodiversity. So congrats to you guys. I read the book once, twice. I just love it. You don't read it in the evening because you won't fall asleep. Read it in the morning. Charles, take it away, and congrats to all of
you. Okay, so yeah, and so we are here joined by Charles C. Mann, who's, like I said earlier, an incredible author, whose book 1491, for my thinking, is just one of the best critiques of colonialism and imperialism and ecosystems. Of course, up there with Jared Diamond's Collapse, or some of the other kind of theoreticians that have dealt with collisions of different kinds of ecosystems. So, Charles, I wanted to just get your reaction to the book because you've contributed to it, and you have a really broad experience with thinking about sort of design, of course, and its impact on human society.
I was just really excited. It's a wonderful book, but also these guys are playing a big role in, I think, of one of the major tasks facing our generation, the generations to come. In 2008, half the world, for the first time, lived in cities. And by 2050, it's going to be 70%, 80%, 90%. Some enormously large fraction of humankind is going to be living in cities. The problem is that our cities don't work very well. We're moving into an urban space that has just huge problems and is only going to get worse. Most of those cities, for historic reasons, are built on ports. And we know that that's really terrible for climate change. As cities get larger, they tend to become financial centers, which means that there's a long history of corruption and inequality associated with cities as they get larger and larger. And then these large centralized facilities impose on the countryside. And they have footprints that reach out, for hundreds of miles, and in a way that, in fact, Marx talked about, right? And so all of these things are just going to get worse and worse unless we radically rethink how cities work. And one of the ways that I really like about them is the idea of ending this relationship where you have this dense centralized core with, which basically effectively nature has been banished, and then you have it surrounded by this completely artificial construction of farms and so forth, and integrating them much more. And this is something that you see actually in indigenous cities in the global South. You see them in older cities in Africa. And I really like the feel of what they're doing, which is to essentially come up with a technologically sophisticated way of doing some of these things that we used to know how to do in the past. And I can't think of a more exciting kind of project. It's, as you said, the architecture of the 1990s was about building beautiful sculptures and cramming people inside them, sort of willy-nilly, however they went. And this is seems to me a much more humane way to live that is actually kind of appealing. So my hat is off to you, and you guys are participating in, I think, the work of the next 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said for how cities are shaping the notion of global sort of geopolitical issues as well. And inequality is going to be a massive issue. As we've seen with this COVID-19 situation, something like $400 billion has been generated in just the last several months. I mean, so the notion that billionaires and the commerce of how people are thinking about scarcity is something that's really fascinating. And then on top of that, the sort of depletion of natural resources, that hyper consumption. There's so many things that this kind of pandemic situation has actually led us to critique the notion of capitalism itself. So with that said and done, I want to make sure to kind of just bounce some ideas off you guys about your book, and then just open it up to the audience. So Mitchell, I would love for you and Charles to riff with Maria as well, because Charles's critique of some of the notions of how as cities evolve has really, I think, kind of drifted over some of you guys thinking, and maybe there could be a good point of entry to think about how biomimicry and other forms of use of nature as a kind of a generative engine, rather than more of the crude methods that we, the 20th century legacy of concrete or other things have left us. I mean, like, say for example, bioceramic, hydrogen, fuel cells, all sorts of other things that your book kind of echoes with architecture as well. Maybe just kind of riff on that for a second.
Yeah. I mean, this is also something that Peder can chime in as well. But I think it's really, before I do that, it's important to recognize that we are led by Vivian Kwan, who is our executive director. She is a massive force that's who basically not really behind the scenes, but she sort of makes everything happen. She's certainly a genius with understanding how design operates, understanding all the different kind of complexities that go into running a nonprofit of our scale, and certainly integrating with many different folks at the city level. Without her working and doing this kind of intervention, it wouldn't be possible for us to do the research that we're doing. So Vivian Kwan is amazing. She's here someplace in the background as usual. She is, not a puppet master, but somehow her positive energy is everywhere. But when it comes to thinking about the city and more population moving into cities that Cam was just talking about, I mean, that's a really big issue. And the big issue is something that you said, Paul, which is diversity. It's not only the diversity between different income classes, races, creeds, religions, people themselves, but it's the biodiversity that's also a problem. So it's hard enough for us as humans to get it right. It's even more difficult if we include basically everything else in the planet's metabolism. So that is a big issue. And I actually look into definitions of nature and ideas in philosophy. I think some of Peder's work with Arne Næss, a Norwegian philosopher, where we kind of equalize or develop a sense of equity between all of these different communities, not only between men and women being equal and different races and cultures being equal, but actually being equal to wolves, rabbits, trees, carrots, everything else that's out there. We can't have this pyramidal hierarchy where man is on the top and everyone else is just sort of underneath or subsumed within that domain. That is just a flawed method of thinking. Everything needs an identity. Everything needs to be recognized, especially now when we recognize that we're one biology. It doesn't matter where you're from. COVID-19 can possibly kill you, and that's a reality. And if we make it through this pandemic, I guarantee you climate change will definitely kill us. So now's the time to move from this crisis to a crisis that has a logic where we respect other things besides just our economy and how we develop different projects and how we think about our cities. Ideas that Cam was talking about, returning to indigenous thinking. Julia Watson, who is a colleague, this is a great idea. We've had concepts about dwelling with this planet that have been around for 2,500 years. Terreform had worked on a project called the Fab Tree Hab. It's making homes from growing woody plants into a geometry that's usable for people, where there's no distinction between the landscape and the house. The entire house is alive, made out of grafted woody plant systems. We're actually working on that now. And this is a new approach. We certainly use the methods of the past that produce things like Bilbao, or think of any Zaha Hadid project. Parametric modeling or computation is certainly a part of it, but it's in the background. What's in the foreground is that nature sort of takes over. And when I say nature, it's really not just nature as just some large term, but it's really socio-ecological. It's an idea that ecology is a great science that gives us some answers, but we have to recognize the capricious interests of the public and our leadership class influence that science, influence that engineering. So our projects move from that spectrum. I don't know if someone else wants to chime in on that, but I'll stop here because I talk forever.
Peder, I mean, there is the Norwegian philosopher Arne Naes, who coined the term deep ecology. And he's been, I think, a figure that's had some impact in your style of thinking and maybe perhaps some of your contributions to the book. Do you want to talk about some of his relationships to this deep ecology systems and
Sure.
thinking and architecture and your
So,
essay in the book?
at the very core of deep ecology, what it really is about is identifying with other species than yourself. So in this case, we'll be identifying with crickets or butterflies or species that you may not be aware of, and try to see how are they doing? How can I help them out? How can I kind of accommodate their lives and make sure they are doing all right? That's at the core. And then there is all kind of philosophy how to do this. Now, there's one problem here I would like to kind of tease Maria and Mitch with. And it's like, not all nature is nice. We experience this now, right? We're getting attacked by this virus. And you know what? I don't want virus in my, we're all fighting it as best as we can. And we can kind of extend that to other species too, that is kind of hard to live with. Snakes, bugs in your shower, that kind of stuff. You don't really want it around. So, my question to you guys is, how do you deal with biodiversity when biodiversity is not friendly? You don't want it around. I always joke, I don't want biodiversity in my hair. There's like a limit to it, and how do you negotiate those limits in architecture?
Well, let's unpack that. I mean, Peder, I want to make sure to unpack that for the audience here. Is that some people have actually specifically stated that loss of biodiversity and biomes have actually contributed to the formation of the COVID-19 sort of global situation, mainly because of deforestation and the way bats, for example, then set up colonies like Ebola, for example. They traced to a series of situations where one village, a colony of bats took up residence, and one of the children got sick. Or even, for example, if you look at, it's been 100 years since the last major pandemic, the influenza of 1918. And that was actually something that radically shaped the geopolitical discourse of the last century as well. So one thing, Maria, maybe you can talk to this. We're looking at this notion of extractive systems, and capitalism and hypercapitalism applied to the ecological systems has created something that's radically unsustainable. And I wanted to just hear some of your thoughts on that, because you've been philosophically inclined over the last your other book as well. And in this one, this is something that keeps coming up as a sort of recurring motif. Maybe you and Charles can riff on that as well, or just a thought if you have any things on capitalism, extraction, scarcity, just putting that out there. And audience, by the way, if you have questions, we're going to begin to take questions in a moment. So start thinking about it and you can post. But Maria, Charles, you guys want to riff for a moment?
Well, I wanted to respond to Peder and say that when you're designing with life, you very quickly learn that death is part of the equation, right? And so if we think of these systems, we had to really start with experimentation and try to achieve this balance. And ecosystems are supremely balanced by themselves, right? They have a way to kind of go through full circles, and where we suffer the way we design buildings, the way we design cities, that we don't integrate that balance into them. It's kind of only, it goes in one direction. And if you think of capitalism, it's always about growth, about producing more, about earning more, and it doesn't take into the equation that life cycle. And so once we started experimenting with these living systems, we had to learn how to balance them. And in a way, it's really poetic if you think where we are today, and it's dangerous for us to be in a mechanically ventilated building because it can circulate coronaviruses. On the other hand, the monarch sanctuary that we designed, this double skin facade, recreates the conditions of that meadow in Mexico where all these butterflies are migrating. So these are the optimum conditions for butterflies, but also for human to survive. So it's in a way, it's kind of taking the systems from the naturally occurring ecosystems and creating similar, highly designed, highly engineered ecosystems in a building and in a city.
By using natural processes, right? I mean, that's the point. I mean, it's a beautiful thing because you have to imagine that we've looked at industrial processes over the 20th, now 21st century, and many of those systems are just not working. So biomimicry and the notion of a kind of a reflexive engagement with natural processes, that's probably a good point of entry for Charles. I mean, Charles, do you want to talk about some of your views on that as well?
Sure. I mean, as Peter said, there are problems with nature, right? That's your basic thing. And there's sort of two ways to deal with that. One is that natural systems, if they're well balanced, tend to fight them off in the same way that a healthy immune system is less prone to getting infected. There's an analogy there. The other way is, unfortunately, what we've chosen with industrial agriculture and that kind of thing, which is gets on what is called the toxic treadmill, which is where you have a problem, you stamp it out with one chemical, then you sort of keep lurching on and you go stamping out chemical by chemical, hoping that you will always be able to outwit your natural perils instead of having a resilient natural system. And essentially you're positing that a few thousand really smart guys in white coats can do the work that an entire natural immune system does. And as with COVID-19 is showing, that when these systems fail, they fail big time. And so one of the things that I like about what Maria and Mitch are doing is it seems to me that they're sort of pointing the way towards having a system in which these problems will emerge, but there's much less at stake when they do. I mean, yes, you don't want to have a bug in your hair, but it's great if it's only one bug. It's not so great when it's an onslaught or something like that. And that is the problem with the system that we now have.
Yeah, and so I think that these are all points of entry into the book's kind of presentation and many of the projects that are actually kind of reviewed. And these are all things that I think TerreformONE has actually really done some deep dives into in terms of how people are thinking of competitive versus cooperative models, for example, or even just how cities can be as an organic system, reflections of all sorts of different approaches to renewable and sustainable processes. So these are things that I would encourage the audience, if you got a second, the book, like we've been saying earlier, it's available throughout the web on most major platforms. And I want to make sure there's people who are posting questions. So if with everyone's permission, if you guys don't mind, I want to just open it up to a couple of the questions I'm seeing coming in across my screen here. So if you have questions, jump in and just start posting, and I'll try. I can't get to all of them because there's a bunch going by here. I'm going to answer. I'm going to ask the panelists to respond to about 4, and if we can keep going, if everyone has enough time. So the first one is from Mitch, and it says, Mitch, in areas you're looking to install, in the areas you're looking to install those structures, are they targeting existing buildings or new development? If it's new development, are you looking at mostly commercial or other types?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our system that we're doing this kind of like for the butterflies and other various projects, it's meant to be retrofit on existing buildings as much as possible. I think that's where we can do the most good with the least amount of impact when it comes to embodied energy and creating something. So these unitized modular biotopes can adhere to a facade, and they could build in more biodiversity wherever you are in a city. I think that's the major goal. There are some newer projects that are development projects from scratch that are going up anyway, that have a lot of forces behind them, a lot of economic forces. And then we'll think about those projects closely with other architect and engineering teams and develop that into the skin of a building that would be a new development project. So the projects themselves work best almost in any environment, especially at the scale where people have some relationship to the exterior of the building. Certainly at the podium of a large scale building or a parking garage, or buildings that are a few stories, 5 to 8 stories. This is where you have some relationship between scale and the building. So we definitely like working where there's a kind of intimacy between biodiversity and the experience that the public has when they encounter one of these biotopes on the skin of a building.
Okay. And so one of the other questions from the audience is, do you see these more sustainable architectural practices being integrated into the mainstream in the immediate future? And that's for all of you guys, whoever wants to take that one. Just
Maria can probably handle
Sure.
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think yes, definitely. When we first started TerreformONE almost 15 years ago, we were really outsiders. We weren't even considered a part of the profession, and kind of slowly moved to a place where we are at the table. And now we have colleagues from around the world that are integrating these technologies into their projects, and projects are being built. Biodesign, which was kind of a handful of scientists experimenting in a few universities, is now a new industry, and with full-size manufacturing. I'm currently at Arab, which is one of the largest engineering firm in the world, and we're building large-scale infrastructure projects incorporating many of these technologies. So I think we've gone in the last decade and a half, we've forged really forward, and now we have proof of principles. We have blazed the path, but there's still a long way to go to be incorporated in a mainstream architecture.
Okay, and there's a couple other questions to come in. I'm going to, all right, we have one that says, which one of your projects is rolling out at scale? How are you approaching the challenges of going from a POC to scale? And he puts in all caps here, thank you for the work that you do, with like many exclamation points.
Yeah. We've got a lot of projects that happen at different scales of economy. So some time ago, we were working on mycelium, or the root base of mushrooms. We did this project with other colleagues. Phil Ross is a fantastic person that we've worked with, and also some folks at Ecovative. And we made chairs that you grow from essentially mushrooms, the root base of reishi. And these are chairs that we can micro-manufacture. They take around 7 days to grow. They're fitted with bamboo templates. They last for 10, 15 years easily. And when you're done with them, you throw them into a garden, and they feed thousands of other forms of life. So this is something that we did all of the R&D work on, and then prototyped, went through 8 years of research and design, then made something that can be manufactured. Other things that, like the butterfly project, is something that we're rolling out, like I said, in LA and in Switzerland. That's at scale. That's something that's this unitized volume that is fitted to a lot of different facades, and that's something that we're also looking at. But that's not the only projects that we've been doing. I just think that's a couple we want to mention right now. Certainly the digester that we're doing with mealworms that eat styrofoam. This is science that's solid. It's pretty good. And we've just provided the kind of industrial design motif behind it so that we can get it out to the public. Other things that are a little bit far out there, like our in vitro meat habitat, that's a project that just sparked the imaginations of folks in regenerative medicine, in molecular cell biology, in many other fields, where we can actually shape extracellular matrix from pigs, or basically pig cells, into usable industrially designed objects. So we're going to make leather products in a lab, bless you, from that produce belts, handbags, shoes, where they're grown in vitro, where no sentient creature is harmed. They're victimless systems. So this is something that we do the R&D work for, and then, because that's what our group is great at, and then we hand it off to others, such as these guys working at Modern Meadows, where they work at getting the price and making it more available to everyone else. So it's not necessarily just happens overnight. There's a lot of kind of inquiry and mistakes that one makes until we get it right at Terraform and put a project like that out there.
Okay. And by the way, today marks literally we've had over 100,000 people losing their life from COVID-19. So this is a really strange milestone day, and it's heartbreaking to see how many people have lost their lives, and that's definitely an undercount. So I just wanted to say it's really a powerful moment to kind of meditate on the human intervention into biomes and loss of biodiversity, and how that then boomerangs back. There's a couple of quick questions that I want to just use one of them actually says, as integrating biology and architecture isn't a common idea, I'm curious to know what was the first project of TerreformONE and how it was initiated.
Well, actually, I don't know. I can leave it to these guys to talk about like any kind of idea of the history or the background going back centuries where biology and architecture, biology in cities, it's just this isn't anything new. I don't think things like biomimicry is not new. Where else did humans get ideas from? They looked to nature and they discovered these are the ways things perform, and they imported those programs for humans to copy or to mimic. So I'm not that to me is been around for a long time. I don't know where something like that first started. We don't lay claim to the very first group that's ever integrated biology into design. I don't know if Cam or Peder could maybe take a stab at that one. That's a really this is a profound question.
So Mitch is right. People have been inspired by biology, since beginning of civilization, if you like. But you can also say that modern architecture, or contemporary architecture, is defined by an interest in science. So from the Bauhaus and the contemporary architecture today that have been taking science as a source of inspiration. In that sense, that goes back maybe 70, 80, 100 years or so. And TerreformONE is building on that aspiration of merging architecture and science in order to create a good culture. So yes, this has been going on for a while.
Okay. So, but by the way, I just want to make sure that you guys get the idea. It was the first.
You want to?
What's that?
Cam was on mute. I think he was.
Oh, I was just going to say that
okay.
they're just what you're doing is bringing in a different kind of science. The architects of the 20th, early 20th century were inspired by physics and new, people like Eiffel and new materials and so forth. What you're bringing in is ecology, which is, in that respect, it's a new way of doing something very old.
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing is that, like, if you look at the 19th century versus the 20th versus the 21st, is that we now have many more options of materials, and there's been such a huge revolution in materials as people move away from the simplicity of the industrial age to these kinds of biomimicry kind of an approach to things. So there's a couple more questions, and then let's see. I want to make sure. I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to remember you can buy the book. The easiest is on Amazon. I know people are having issues with Amazon, but it's the most direct and easiest. I do want to do a plug. We all have our copies. You guys get your copies. And so I'm going to use one last audience question as a kind of a pivot, and then maybe we can have each of you guys do closing remarks. Let's see. Question 8 was from Candino. And it says, how do you reckon biotopes can play a role in reshaping urban interventions that promote distancing or isolation between humans, given today's COVID situation? And so if you can answer that, Mitch, maybe, or Maria, or whichever one wants to take that, then let's go to each of you for closing remarks. And the rest, I do want to encourage everyone, we can continue the conversation on Twitter or on Terraform's Twitter or Instagram as well.
Yeah. How does one use biotopes to deal with the social distancing problems, et cetera? Well, I think that's just it. I think that's one of many potential answers and avenues that we can use in architecture and urban design and planning, which is build more space for biodiversity. Like we just don't need to cram people into tighter and smaller boxes. We don't need to use up every inch of development space for things to get a return on the investment. I know that's the goal for some folks, the bottom line. But now let's think about relaxing it a little bit. Let's have some breathing room. And in that breathing room in cities, give a chance to something else to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive, to really live. So I think biotopes and thinking about a patchwork, mosaic patchwork in urban ecology is absolutely crucial. And there are many groups that are doing that. So there's more and more opportunity.
Okay, so you guys want to just rotate through and maybe do a quick closing statement about the book and some of your thoughts on what your trajectories are for the rest of the year. The book, like I've said, told the audience, I'm going to do it again to make sure we're going to have a link at the end where you can get it. But how about Maria, you start, and then we'll have each of you guys do a closing remarks, and we'll go from there. Maria, you have any closing statement?
Sure. So I think what this book represents, it is the product of radical collaboration between many people, many disciplines, and also radical experimentation. Because to experiment means that you will fail and things will die, but then you discover new things. And in the time we're today, I don't think it's the end of cities. Some people have been saying it. I think we need more experimentation in cities. So I'd like to end with a call for both radical collaboration and radical experimentation in cities.
Peder?
So I'm sure many of the viewers will have sort of this sense of, catastrophe looming, climate change, bio collapse, ecological catastrophes, pollution, etc., etc. And there are just moments of despair, which I feel, and many people listening to feel. And I think what this book offers is a sort of sense of hope, sense of, there's a way out. It might not be, the only way out, of course not, but there's a way out of this mess we are in. And it's quite urgent. If you're listening in, this is quite urgent. We need to do something. Otherwise, human beings are not going to be around. So that positive message in the book is a hard one, positive message, but is worth really listening to and take to heart in a moment of despair and crisis.
Okay. So Mitch and Charles, so you guys have any closing statements?
Seems like Mitch should have the last word, so I'll say something. That this is for the audience. Most of you guys probably live in cities, I'm going to guess. So this is an experiment that's going to be taking place in your home. And one of the big parts of it that they haven't talked about much is that these guys can come up with great ideas, but as long as community boards, zoning regulations, you name it, the entire sort of bureaucracy that sets the rules for how we live in cities aren't open to those innovations, it's going to be harder and harder to make cities the way that they should be. But one of the things that I would hope is that people who would read this book and feel a sense of excitement about the possibility of change in cities. And the lack of excitement about this and the fear of change is one of the biggest obstacles to making us all live in a better world.
Okay, thank you. And Mitch?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think actually everyone's characterized the kind of the base elements of the book really well. And certainly Maria's sort of heartfelt ideas about getting radical and being green, totally agree with. I guess I'll just say, thank you to, John Rudikoff and Heather Lord as our, co-chairs of the board of directors. Certainly to the R&R Foundation, who have been a major support for us for some time, and BASF, who are super great, and the folks at the New Lab. Our entire board is just absolutely amazing. Yourself, Paul, also for all of your hard work. I think that's important. Our team, wherever they are, spread across everywhere, I guess New York mostly, that are working every single day via Zoom to continue doing our projects. I think these are the people that make up the kind of the real blood of TerreformONE, and I'm just really honored and proud to be working with everybody, and I do my best to be on staff as a research director, but we all contribute to this kind of dialogue. We're called Terreform because we are a group. It's not led by some single ego, and I think that's super important to understand. And we'd love it if you support us by getting the book. We're going to make another one, that's for sure. It's more radical on extinction, and I'd certainly thanks to Cam and Peder for being here and supporting us, and to Microsoft and Mike Pell for being a part of the Microsoft Garage and the sustainability series, and of course all the good folks at NYU, which also support us. It's just, and there's probably too many other folks to really mention, but I guess I'll just end there saying massive thank you and love beams to everyone that's making an effort to make this world, well, not to make it better, but to get it more diverse, and that's biodiverse and diverse, period. This is the mission now, period.
Okay. All right. So audience, I just want to say thank you guys for making the time. I know time is always a scarce resource, and we're all in the suspended limbo of quarantine and post-COVID situation. So I guess tonight was kind of a virtual architecture party. And is celebrating the ecological post-industrial landscape of a wonderful collection of projects about getting people to think about biology, architecture, and the future of cities. But it doesn't do anything unless we think about policy. This is a great, I'm going to do a little plug here for the new Green Deal that many people have been thinking about. This is the collected essays. We'll maybe throw this in as a little spice. If you buy the book, you'll maybe get a PDF there. But anybody out there, if you want to continue the questions, you can ping me and I'll retweet it. My Twitter's @DJSpooky, and I'll CC the Microsoft Garage and TerreformONE. So with that said and done, everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning into the virtual architecture party celebrating the launch of Design with Life 2020. And just thank you guys so much for your work, Mitchell, Maria, Charles, and Peter, and Mike Pell from Microsoft. Everybody, thank you, and to be continued on the internet and many other places. So best of luck for the book. All right, you guys.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, bye everybody. All right, bye.